Welcome once again to our study of Omniscient Jigme Lingpa's Treasury of Precious Qualities with the commentary by Kangyur Rinpoche, Longchen Yeshe. And as always, kindly begin with generating the mind of bodhicitta, the intention to establish all beings on the level of perfect enlightenment. And while this is a very noble aspiration, we're actually engaging in this with a real path, an actual practical way of doing this, not just say a vague aspiration, but a very precise science and a very precise methodology, which consists of presently exposing ourselves to the idea that shape an understanding of how to work with who we are presently, and also giving an idea of what the path is about and where this path leads. And we're drawing on tremendous insight from a tradition 2,500 years old that right until the present day really has been continued as not just a heritage of insight, but also a living tradition of persons that cultivated and fully realized the nature of this path. So in that way, we we find ourselves with extremely fortunate circumstances. So we begin with invoking the wisdom of Omniscient Jigme Lingpa, the source of love and compassion for all beings, who knows all that is knowable, emanation of Longchenpa, heir to a treasury of mind talents, sky-like yogin of the vast expanse of luminosity, Jigme Lingpa, at your feet we pray. So I'll try not to damage your ears too much with my clearing my throat, which sometimes I end up doing quite a bit. So we're presently going to be looking at, which is very helpful actually for us, especially in the modern world where there's, you could say, we're quite innocent with regards to following the spiritual path. And so we have plenty of examples of teachers who really have exploited the innocence of the modern person who is not really equipped to properly assess and validate who is a genuine guru, who is enlightened and who's not. And so we've had in recent years plenty of, you could say, problems with this situation. And the Paul Rinpoche, he made a very important point, really, where he said, you know, the first object of refuge, actually, when we come to the Dharma, it's really the Dharma itself, assessing the validity of the teaching. That really gives us a strong vision and understanding of what the path is about. And that's again where we come back to the Buddha himself, who spoke of the four reliances, of which the first is rely not on the individual, but rely on the teaching. So that's the first place that we go to. But then also we need to assess then what is a proper teacher. And so we presently are looking then at the necessary circumstances for the path. First, you could say a location in which we can practice, an environment, and then a context in which we can apprentice with a spiritual teacher, a guide on the path. So presently we're then looking at the category of false teachers. How do we recognize them? And and so Jigme Lingpa in the root text says, but, so sort of basically in the previous line, assessing the value of a teacher, then we say, but there are teachers of the path who are like wooden millstones. They care about their lineage, no different from a Brahmin priest, or else are fearful lest their home and seat decline. And as for the results of learning and reflection, it's as though they bathe themselves in a polluted pond. So here we shouldn't take too much offense on behalf of the Brahmin priesthood. Really, Jigme Lingpa brings this back to a very real situation in Tibet, where you very often have the lamas, tugus, and so on, basically catering to a lineage and basically catering to their particular institution. Of course, the implication here is that we could just be mechanical without a deep engagement. So Kangyur Rinpoche comments, some teachers, however, are like wooden millstones. And as we can imagine, a wooden millstone is not much use. We need a proper stone millstone. And so wooden millstone wouldn't last a minute. So it says here, some teachers, however, are like wooden millstones. They practice the Dharma dishonestly and out of pride, merely in order to preserve a line of incarnate lamas or a family lineage no different from what a Brahmin priest would do. So obviously the Brahmin priest somehow in the Buddhist vernacular has somehow gotten a bad rep. I can't assess any of that, but okay. They practice merely out of concern for the reputation of their monastery, fearing that their ecclesiastical residence or tradition might otherwise decline. Trying to secure wealth or religious patrimony with such an evil motivation is like bathing in a filthy pond. The problem lies in the motivation. So of course they're doing something that ostensibly looks like Dharma, but is not. It says here, such people are made even dirtier by the experience. Thus to receive, study and explain the teachings and to build stupas, make statues and so forth with such motives as these is not true Dharma. Indeed, it will be the person's ruin. This is why the root text speaks of bathing in a filthy pond. Empty and noisy boasting about qualities contribute nothing to the mind's discipline, just as a wooden millstone is incapable of grinding bulk and cannot produce flour. Such teachers bring their disciples to ruin. So we have to discern here whether the motivation is pure or not. The act itself of upholding the institution and giving empowerments, this almost inevitably comes with the situation of the system. You could say the system exists on the basis of compassion. So we have to establish systems. There has to be institutions. There has to be structure. So we can't just sort of chuck the baby out with the bathwater and say, you know, institutions are bound to fail. They're not. And we have plenty of stories like that. If you read the life story of Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche in his early years, then of course the Tsongsa Labrang and so on insisted that he travel because they were low on funds. It had been a while since because great lamas, even though Tsongsa actually had some very great lamas, Ngari Rinpoche and Gangna Tuku and others actually, then it had been a while since Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo and so forth. So Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche was actually asked to go out and then, you know, basically make just being very blunt with regards to doing that. Such teachers, these kind of teachers, they really just are digging their own grave, bathing in a pool of filth. And as such, this is something to be aware of. So that's where not to be done. That's what we would classify as false teachers. And of course, then there's a general sense that, yes, this happens. So there has to be discernment on the part of the student. Then Jigme Lingpa says, others are no different from the common run of beings, but with the faith of fools, they preen themselves. Because of wealth and honor shown to them, they swell with pride. Indeed, like well frogs are such virtuous friends. So here, then again, Jigme Lingpa, Kangyur Rinpoche comments, again, there are some people who, though their minds are filled with defilements, no different from ordinary beings, have, as a karmic result of some trivial generosity in the past, obtained the position of a teacher in this life. They put on airs and persuade themselves that they are somebody after all, preening themselves, sort of puffing themselves up, or rather becoming puffed up with pride. I think preening is this thing that birds, they do when they're sort of cleaning themselves, right? Sort of just, making the feathers look good. Because they receive offerings, honors, and service from their devotees who go bowing and scraping in front of them, fools who know nothing about the true characteristics of a genuine spiritual master! Exclamation mark. Such spiritual friends are like well frogs, as described in the famous story. So some of you would know this story from Words of My Perfect Teacher. Hold on, let's see here. There was once an old frog who lived in a well. One day he was visited by another frog who lived by the sea. The two frogs fell into conversation and began to compare their different dwelling places. Unable to comprehend that there could exist something more vast and grand than his humble well, which for him was the summit of excellence and comfort, the old frog was persuaded to make the journey to see the ocean for himself. When he arrived there, the immensity of the sea terrified him so much that his head split open with shock. So that's where there's a rather sort of lack of imagination with regards to some persons that would simply think that, yes, somebody completely unqualified just because of a few, you could say, superficial attributes, they then are gurus. Then that's where, again, there's really a need to be discerning, that we don't end up as fools. 18. So you could say this was in the case of somebody with just some karmic situation in which they end up having the title as a teacher. Then there's that which is even worse. Some have little learning and are lax in vows and pledges. Though base in mind, they act as though they soared above the earth. They cut the drawstrings of compassion and of love. Through such mad guides does sinfulness increase. Okay, so then Kangyur Rinpoche says there are other impostors, those who have only a smattering of the teachings. They have taken the vows and embraced the tantric commitments, but they are ignorant of the precepts, and their discipline is quite distorted. They have no idea of the three trainings, meaning discipline, meditation, and wisdom, and their minds, awash with defects, are base and degenerate. They pretend to teach and give instructions, but it is sheer guesswork, and they behave as though they are soaring in the skies of realization. Moreover, they do not actually care for their disciples, and the drawstrings of love and compassion have broken. Attendance on such insane guides inevitably leads to the precipice of negativity, to the abyss of the lower realms, and to ever-increasing evil. So again, then there's such a strong warning against associating with persons who really have a perverted spirit, practically no understanding of the Dharma, and who are entirely motivated just by pride and so forth. 19. To follow such blind mentors on the strength of their renown, whose qualities do not exceed their own, who have no bodhicitta, is a serious mistake, for by such a false discipleship one wanders in the dark. The teacher's knowledge should be greater than that of the disciple. If this is not the case, and if people who are supposed to be teachers are lacking in bodhicitta, it is a great mistake to follow them, attracted perhaps by their fame and personal charisma. It's evident that the blind cannot be led by those who are themselves blind guides. Therefore, to place one's trust in someone whose eye of wisdom is closed is a serious error in both the immediate and the ultimate term. Teachers like this are unconcerned that their disciples are acting contrary to the Dharma. They make a pretense of caring for them because they enjoy being served and respected, and their disciples help them, believing that they are serving their teachers, despite the fact that such masters are immersed in the 8 worldly concerns, and their actions are quite destitute of any underlying wisdom or valid support. Associating with such people and in such a way deprives disciples of any chance of understanding what behavior is to be adopted and what is to be rejected. They will consequently wander in the darkness of the lower realms. The problem with such teachers is that the students will look to these people and think, aha, this is the path of enlightenment. They'll mingle their minds with the minds of such persons, and as such you begin to have a lineage really of just toxic mind states, essentially imbued with kleshas, and also a profound lack of understanding of what really this path consists of in terms of what is it that we should abandon, what is it that needs to be cultivated. So this simply takes one into practice of causes that lead to the lower realms. 20. By failing to subject such teachers, therefore, to a stringent test, those who place their faith in them will waste their stock of merit. The finding of this time of freedom will be just as when mistakenly one takes a dangerous serpent for the shadow of a tree. So that's where we end up wasting a lifetime thinking something that is not Dharma as being Dharma. Kangyur Rinpoche says, for the above reasons, aspirants may well be devoted and sincerely interested in practicing the Dharma, but if they fail to check whether their teachers are truly qualified and commit themselves regardless, they will be throwing away their present qualities as well as those who come in relation to the path. Their very human existence, endowed with the 8 freedoms, I think many of us know what they are, but let's just see here. See chapter 1, yeah, we've covered that. Which they have only just obtained after waiting so long, will be rendered meaningless. Their situation is like someone going toward a dark mass of poisonous snakes, thinking that is the cool shadow of a tree. Expecting shade and coolness, they hope to refresh themselves, but will be punished for their mistake with a poisonous bite, as it is said in the Vijayadhara Pitaka. They, disciples, fail to judge him truly. He is ignorant and has no answers to their questions. This teacher is a demon for his students. So, as I think many of us know, this happens. There's no need for further elaboration. But then we look at evoking the sublime qualities of an authentic teacher. That's what Jigme Lingpa then says. But teachers who are rich with every perfect quality, who from the sphere of all the Buddha's primal wisdom and compassion come in human form to worlds where there are beings to be trained, such teachers are the supreme root of all accomplishments. So that's where we see those that from the Dharmakaya, from the wisdom, from the complete condition of awakening, entirely take rebirth out of compassion, what we then refer to as the Nirmanakaya of the Buddha, or the manifest body of the Buddha, the true bhikkhu or tuku. Such persons come in to the world entirely on the basis of wisdom and compassion. And it's reliance on such teachers then, of course, that all the qualities that we can apprentice with such persons and awaken these qualities within ourselves on the basis of their example and their blessing. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, but masters who are steeped in the sacred scriptures and their commentaries, whose eyes of wisdom are open wide, and who, through their extraordinary realization of the 3 trainings, are skilled in liberating their disciples' minds. Teachers such as these are supreme, their minds replete with every quality of doctrine and realization. So these are what we call the two dharmas. This is what is the great nature, or one of the great aspects of understanding the Dharma, or how we should understand the Dharma, is in terms of called Lung and Tokpa, which are Agrama and what is it again? Oh, Abhisamaya, but never mind. It means that we have teaching, which is the theoretical component, the heritage of all the theory and methods of the Buddhist teaching, and then persons that actually live this. We have a lineage of realization, beings who perfectly have followed in the Buddha's footsteps and who manifest the qualities of enlightenment within this world. So, speaking of such teachers then, Kangyur Rinpoche continues, they manifest from the self-arising, ever-present expanse of vast non-conceptual compassion within the state of primordial wisdom beyond thought, the Dharmakaya of all the Buddhas of the 10 directions. So in such a place, the Buddha doesn't have the notion that I will manifest for such and such. Simply just without any kind of reference point, then compassion, without any kind of delusion, compassion manifests spontaneously on the basis of the merit of sentient beings. It says then, in the world of living beings, they, such stainless teachers, appear in countless forms, and for human beings who are now born in the residual period of the Buddha's teachings, they manifest as spiritual friends. We have this famous quote from the sutras where the Buddha says, Ananda, despair not. In the future, I shall manifest as the spiritual friend. This is the Buddha speaking. So, with regards to such spiritual friends, Kangyur Rinpoche says, they are the peerless source of all qualities on the path and of all supreme and ordinary accomplishments. As the Tantra, Chidu Gongpa Dupa, the combined intention of wisdom. This is a famous, this is really the basis of what we call the Anu Yoga. It says, Buddhahood can never be attained without reliance on a teacher. Such a thing indeed I never saw, and if it does occur, the scripture is disproved. So basically we're saying it's not likely that there ever will be any Buddhahood without a teacher. 22. For sake of guiding on the path, they seem in harmony with all, and yet with worldly ways they are in fact at variance. Owing to their wise intent, they are superior to all. They are skillful in dispelling doubts and bear with spite and weariness. Kangyur Rinpoche says, authentic spiritual masters act with the intention of leading beings of every kind along the path of freedom. This is the only reason they engage in apparently worldly behavior. So that's where they're in harmony with everyone. They're in this world. They're not making waves. They engage with the language and the conventions of this world. However, Kangyur Rinpoche says, in truth, however, they are untouched by anger, even when they appear to be subjugating opponents. And likewise, they're without attachments, even though they appear to be taking care of their families. While in the midst of such entertainments, their minds are undistracted. Though they may accumulate wealth, they are free of grasping, and they have no pride, though they may have property and influence. Seeing all appearances as dreams and delusions, their minds are like space. Even if their actions and words seem at variance with mundane conventions, it is a mistake to judge them wrongly, for there are many purposes behind such actions, as they train beings according to their wisdoms. So such individuals are entirely without any kind of interests and without any kind of, you could say, familiar patterns that we normally associate with various external signs, such as maybe being tough on others, which in the case of a great teacher entirely comes without any aggression, without any anger. It is just skillful means. We sometimes say the wrath of a teacher is what dispels the obstacles of the student. Without any attachment, we might see teachers who look after their families and yet completely without the ordinary associated attachment, worries, and so forth. They might engage in entertainments. Their minds are being undistracted. They're not attached to anything that we normally associate with. So we cannot judge such individuals on the basis of the external conventions. So while they might appear as ordinary persons, their minds are very different from from ordinary individuals. This, of course, also is something that to some extent actually requires taking some time out. And that's also what's often we see in the scriptures, where it says, you should obviously take time. Sometimes I think in the Vajra Tantra it says you should check the teacher for 12 years. When this comes to the Vajrayana, in which the Vajrayana engagement is something very, very important, very personal, and above all, in the engagement of the Vajrayana teacher, you no longer see the teacher as an external person. You see the teacher as Buddhahood manifest, as the external reflection of your own Dharmakaya. And as such, the teacher is seen as Vajradhara, as seen as Yeshe Tsogyal or Tara or Kangyur Rinpoche. There's not the notion of the teacher as an ordinary person. And that's where we need to assess, is this teacher really someone who, like it says here, merely manifests out of compassion from the vast non-conceptual realm of complete awakening. So once there is such a person, yes, these can be fully relied upon. So, it says, there are great ships of rescue from the ocean of existence. They are great ships of rescue from the ocean of existence, true mentors, undeceiving on the supreme path. They are a nectar rain to quench the fiery mass of karma and defilements, and like sun and moon, dispel the dark of ignorance. They are strong and all-supporting like the earth itself, a source of benefit and bliss like wish-fulfilling trees, like perfect vessels filled with treasuries of Dharma. Greater even than the wishing jewel, they are a source of all. They are the parents of all living beings, loving them with equal love, and like a running river is their great and swift compassion. In joy they are unchanging like Sumeru, king of mountains. With untroubled equanimity, they are like clouds of rain. Such teachers are the peers of all the Buddhas. Even their assailants are connected to the path of bliss. On those who follow them with true devotion, qualities of high rebirth and freedom shower down like rain. So Kangyur Rinpoche comments, true spiritual masters are greater than anyone in the world. They are expert in cutting through the doubts of their disciples related to the words and meaning of the teachings or to the practice and the dispelling of obstacles. So the teachers are able to clarify the meaning, and they're also able to guide students in their practice. Spiritual masters are not downcast when others abuse and criticize them. So this is where they bear with spite and weariness. However exhausted they may become physically, verbally, and mentally in the service of others, they bear everything with patience. And it is through the practice of their essential instructions that beings cross over the sorrowful ocean of existence and reach the land of freedom. So that's where we talk about the scriptures in general. We talk about, for example, the Buddha's teachings, the words of the Buddha and the Buddha Vachana, and then we have the Shastras, the commentaries. And of course, over 2,500 years, and specifically since the early centuries of the Common Era, we have an enormous amount of commentarial literature in the classic Indian context and also in the obviously in the Tibetan tradition and even nowadays. But what we have then is what the teacher then can offer is really the distillation, the pith, the essential instruction. So of course, while it's helpful to have the overall knowledge and understanding and the sort of the rational instructions that come down from a thorough Buddhist education, to actually apply this requires then the essential instructions, the pith then that enables us to actually really integrate this knowledge. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, spiritual masters are thus like great ships. They are true guides, able to teach the common path without mistake, and can explain the sense of the sublime sutras of definitive meaning, as well as the tantras. So we talk about various kinds of sutras. Some are very straightforward, and they Well, they're not so easy for the modern person actually, because what we call the sutras with the expedient meaning talk about things that are not that familiar to the modern person, which is, you could say, based on the Indian cosmology or Indo-Tibetan cosmology, an understanding of rebirth, an understanding of the realms of samsara and so forth. Nevertheless, they reflect an understanding of how our world essentially is shaped by the conceptual mind. And as such, then, relating with, you could say, the ordinary notions of a solid world out there and places in which we then experience realms and experience lifetimes and so forth. The sutras of definitive meaning are then the ones that actually speak about the true nature of how phenomena and how the mind exists. So that's where we talk about definitive sutras in various contexts. And then we have the Tantras. Again, the Vajrayana teachings, the scriptures then that lay out the vision of essentially the tantric vision of the abiding innate purity that then is engaged as the path. So as such then, true guides are able to properly lead one through all you could say, the heritage of Buddhist teaching, and then able to communicate it in a way that it's applicable then for us. As such then, Kangyur Rinpoche say, they are like a rain of nectar, for which the three kinds of wisdom, meaning the wisdom from hearing the teaching, critically analyzing and understanding how the teaching fits with our own situation, our own disposition, and then applying that insight, then generating the wisdom of meditation. So these are the three kinds of wisdom: through hearing, reflecting, and meditating. On the basis of that, then with us hearing the teachings and applying these, it says they extinguish the flames of defiled emotions, the kleshas, and karma, the patterning and the actions, or rather the actions of our patterning, accumulated from beginningless time. They are like the sun and moon, scattering with the radiance of their wisdom the darkness of not knowing what is to be adopted and what is to be rejected. So such teachers, we look to them and we can see, how does enlightenment walk? How does it talk? How is enlightenment, how does it manifest? And that's where we begin to get some idea of what actions is it that we should be adopting. We can look to them as examples. What needs to be done? What it is we need to give up. So such then, really giving us a strong sense of what is real and what is not. Kangyur Rinpoche says they are like the earth, strong and forbearing, unaffected by circumstances, whether good or bad. Since they reveal the path to the higher realms and ultimate excellence, they are like wish-granting trees, a source of the ultimate excellence of Buddhahood and temporary happiness, the joys and prosperity of the higher realms. That kind of recognition of the value of the teacher comes, of course, once we begin to practice the teaching, and then there's the recognition of how this is immensely helpful. There's that famous saying of when Gampopa took leave from Milarepa, and he said, "When should I begin to teach sentient beings?" And he says, "When you understand how this old man you've been studying with, how he is truly the Buddha. At that time, then, yes, that's the time you can teach sentient beings." And that's then really indicative of true you could say within the realm of true realization. Once there's true realization, then there's also an understanding of how much it really was the teacher that facilitated this awakening. So this deep gratitude really is reflected whenever we come across the songs and so on, the writings of the masters of the path. They always speak of how indebted they are to their teacher. So again, they are like the vase of miracles, for they contain the treasure of all the words and meanings of the sutras and tantras. As the source of all realization, they're even greater than a wish-fulfilling gem, making no distinction between those who are close and those who are unfamiliar. They behave like parents to all beings, caring lovingly for them without partiality, wishing to establish them all in happiness and the level of omniscience. So such gurus, they care equally for all beings. There might be some with whom then there is a particular connection, but they care, their entire motivation is entirely equally for all. So that's also, as students, there's never going to be a time where we actually are VIPs in the eye of the teacher. We might have the fortune to be students of a particular teacher, but we should also understand that the teacher is there for, not for our sake, but really equally for all sentient beings. And then what makes the teacher tick, what really makes the teacher, you can say what drives the teacher, is this wish to establish all beings, regardless of who they are, in temporarily the condition of happiness, ultimate at the level of omniscience. Kangyur Rinpoche goes on to say their compassion is like a river, immense and swift, aiming to free all beings from suffering and its causes. Spiritual masters are like Mount Meru, the center of the universe, the greatest mountain there is. Unswayed by jealousy, they delight in the perfection of beings. So that's where, when sentient beings are doing well, if they practice well, then that's what delights them. Nothing could delight a teacher more than a student that achieves perfection. There's never ever a time that the teacher wants to remain supreme. There's never ever a time where the teacher actually wants to be a teacher. What is the sort of hallmark of a great teacher is actually their reluctance to be teachers. And so for them, the only thing that really matters for them is seeing beings perfect themselves, become free. So he says, like a rain cloud, they impartially soothe the negative emotions of all with an equanimity untroubled by hatred or attachment. So the rain doesn't care where it rains. And as such, then the Buddhas, the great teachers and so forth, they attend to the situation of all sentient beings. You stole my student. Or I lost a student there. There's none of that whatsoever. And that's where there's absolutely no kind of jealousy or competition or any such. Such teachers, Kangyur Rinpoche says, are the peers of all the Buddhas, even if they do not display the major and minor marks of attainment. So of course we normally think of the Buddha as having these 32 major marks and 80 minor marks. Merely to see them, hear them, or remember their actions is highly significant. So contact with them in any way is very significant. Even if one does them harm, if one has remorse and confesses one's fault, one will find the path to happiness, whether in this or future lives, and become their disciple. We have these rather funny stories from Eastern Tibet with people who's kind of probably got this line here a little bit wrong, but there is sort of the overall notion that any connection is a good connection. So of course, bodhisattvas, they would say, whoever has connection with me, whether it's a positive connection, whether they're nice to the teacher, or whether they actually, do terrible things to the teacher, then the bodhisattva prays, may whoever has connection with me, may they be free. And of course, this resulted in apparently a not entirely uncommon practice of, people going in and basically making bad connections with the teacher just for the sake of having a connection. They'd go in to the, and just smash up the teacher's shrine or something like that, just to have a connection with them. And of course, yes, that works. Now, Kangyur Rinpoche, he puts in a little bit of a modifier there. He qualifies it a bit. And it says, even if one does them harm, if one has remorse and confesses one's faults, one one will find that path to happiness, whether in this or future lives, and become their disciples. The thing is also, smashing up a guru's shrine probably will bring some immediate negative benefit, even though possibly within a few lifetimes there might be sort of, you might hook up with the teacher in one way or another, but it's probably not something you would choose as your first way of making a auspicious connection to the teacher, obviously. Kangyur Rinpoche goes on to say, those who rely properly on such teachers with faith and unfeigned devotion, genuine devotion, will automatically acquire all the advantages of favorable samsaric rebirth, meaning health, longevity, beauty, good fortune, family, wealth, and intelligence, together with all the qualities of enlightenment, loving kindness, compassion, and so forth. Such qualities will shower upon them like falling rain. And I'm just going to draw your attention to this prayer that we always do at the end of the teachings. This comes from Longchenpa. And actually, this what we just talked about here is summed up in that prayer. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities, etc. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma, have the freedom to practice, may we please the holy gurus, practicing and so forth, and then also benefiting others. So this is really what's implied in terms of us then making aspirations on the basis of having met such teachers, that we, through their associating with them, we then are shaping our future lives. Okay, let's see if there's some questions. So, is such discernment by us also necessary in relation to the people, teachers who write books presenting the written words of the masters? Oh, that's interesting. Well, we would be discerning, yes, we would be discerning about those who write about the Dharma. And it's interesting because we actually, when we read someone, we actually connect with the teacher. So yes, we would want to be a bit discerning. It's a little bit problematic. Sometimes you have persons who are not really qualified, but who begin to write on behalf of great teachers and begin to make interpretations of great teachings. And the teachings themselves are valid, but sometimes it's a little bit questionable whether these persons that are representing the Dharma actually are qualified to do this. This is it's a very complex issue, and I actually, I wouldn't want to be the one who would make a final statement on that, because sometimes, like I remember Trinley Norbu quoting from the life of the Buddha, sometimes even Buddha in his previous lives relied on teachers who were hunters. So, and also if we look at the sixth patriarch, Huineng, he also actually for years lived with hunters and served them as their cook. But anyway, our relationship to the Dharma, when it's then comes down through, you could say, somewhat rusty conduits, possibly we could benefit, but there's a little bit a sense of, yes, we should be a little bit careful. Your sound froze for a while. While you say Kangyur Rinpoche, sound and image froze again. Oh, this is funny because I'm in Brisbane right now, and there's a very fast internet connection. So what to say? I'm sorry, not much to do about it. If teachers can adopt unconventional manners, then how do we determine that they're qualified? That's not easy, is it? Essentially, if they have the inner qualities, okay, I'll answer that one first. If we can see they have genuine compassion, if they really know the teaching, if they have realization. I had some teachers who actually at times would be very rough. They were kampas, and they were tantrikas. One teacher would have a bad temper, but we never ever for a moment actually saw this teacher as having any flaws. He was just sometimes would really get scary. Another teacher, he was more a meditator. He would also behave sometimes in a very wild way. But I never had any doubts about this teacher, and I know other great lamas actually would see him as a very great meditator. But you have these cases of very unconventional students behavior, and Others would have doubts. In this case, my association with my teachers, I had no doubts about their qualities. But it's very difficult to make sort of, you could say, consistent, how to say, it's very difficult to make this call. You know, you have to, I think we all, each individually have to rely on what we've just been looking at here and also our own intuition. So yeah, it's 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 not easy. It's definitely not easy, but then again, to actually bring to this whole project a certain degree of caution is very important. So it's not as if we can have a checklist, tick, 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 tick. It's in a way even more complex than that. So anyway, the question continues. Is it something of an intuitive judgment? Yes, that comes along with practice. Possibly, yes. Particularly in the Nyingma tradition, I think we have many great traditions in the lineage who acted in unconventional ways, like Dogenji Yeshe Dorje and so on. Yes, we had Dogenji Yeshe Dorje who spat Paltro Rinpoche in the face and called him an old dog. And from then on, Paltro Rinpoche actually just thought, oh, well, my teacher is so right. And he would actually sign his works as old dog, you know. In such a case, is the main point that we have the right motivation when searching for and relating to a teacher. That's right. If we're really seeking enlightenment and we really have some just, I would say probably that we have a little bit of a worry about this. You know, Tolkien Rinpoche has written a book called The Guru Drinks Bourbon. I would recommend that. Probably, as you could say, the final word on this matter. But I would say, yes, it has a lot to do with, on one hand, reading the indications of what is a great teacher and what's not. We have it here. We had it in Words of My Perfect Teacher. It's talked about in many places, talked about in many tantras and so on. And then also our own discerning, our own gut feeling, but being careful. Yeah. It says, after we've been studying for a while, do we develop an instinct for who is teaching and how they are teaching and whether it is in keeping with the Dharma? You know, that's where I can't guarantee. You know, I can't say, yep, when you've studied for a while, when you've studied for, you know, X number of years or X number of time, then you will know. I will say that the teaching certainly helps us. So we're on the right path if we're practicing the Dharma in terms of assessing then who is the right and who's a genuine, who's not a genuine teacher. But when we have to know exactly when we have the capacity to judge and not, difficult, and that is sort of the nature of this enterprise. It's a bit like when we fall in love, you know, when we marry people. You'd think that at the time when we marry them that we have some intuition, and yes, we do, and probably nobody can stop us if we're determined. But on the other hand, yes, we look at the history of relationships and so forth, and we can see it is really something that's fraught with, you could say, fraught with peril, but also fraught with success. And we probably wouldn't want to give up on, you could say, the entire institution of commitment to another person just because there have been accidents. And we similarly also wouldn't want to give up on the institution of gurus just because, yes, there have been difficult cases, right? So all we can really do is rely to the best of our ability on some education, some, we could say, linear guidelines, and also less linear intuition. So I think pretty much the questions here all sort of contain the answer, I guess. So 27, relying on the teacher with a 20-fold attitude. Okay, let's see if we have 10 minutes left. Let's see here. Like sick men on their doctors, and like travelers on their guides, like merchants on their helmsmen, and the fearful on their braves, like seamen on their pilots, all those who dread their foes, defilement, birth, and death, should take support of teachers such as these. So we've outlined really what great teachers are like, and then we should rely on them just like the sick rely on doctors, the travelers rely on their guides, merchants rely on their merchants in the old days traveled by sea, particularly to Indonesia, between Indonesia and India, on their captains, the fearful, those who travel and are fearful, on those who escort them, the braves, like seamen, the sailors and their captains, and all those who dread their foes. And this is coming down to where we're at, where we dread the foes, the real enemies. The real enemies are not out there. They exist within the defilements, the kleshas, and also the ordinary concepts that construct the dualistic notion of birth and death. And until we've gone beyond birth and death, the actual experience of continually taking rebirth in samsara, continually losing the most precious thing that we have, the reference point of our body. As long as we're subject to these conditions, yes, it's indispensable that we then take support of teachers. So Kangyur Rinpoche then says, the way in which disciples should rely on their teacher is set forth in the Gandhabhuya Sutra. This, I think, is some of the last section of the Flower Ornament Sutra. Here it is said that disciples should cultivate 4 attitudes. They should consider themselves as invalids, meaning sick persons, afflicted from beginningless time by the disease of defilements, the kleshas. They should look upon the Dharma teachings as medicine, and the teacher should be regarded as a skillful physician, while the practice diligently pursued should be considered as the healing process. With 4 attitudes analogous to these, disciples should think of the teacher as travelers might consider an escort protecting them from enemies. They should depend upon their teachers as on courageous friends guarding them from danger. Again, they should rely on them like merchants who depend on their captain, or voyagers depending on their navigator. If disciples seriously entertain these 20 attitudes, so actually what we have here in the root text are 5 examples, right? We have the, what is it again? The sick on their doctors, travelers and the guides, merchants and the helmsmen, braves, that's 4, seamen on their pilots. Yep, so those are the 5. All such, those who suffer from the conditions of samsara, we should take those 5 examples and combining it with the 4 attitudes, which are then thinking of of themselves as being ill, the teaching as medicine, the teacher as the physician, and the practice as the healing process. So with those 5 sets of 4, then they should not leave the teachers or the practice, leave them as mere lip service. They will be protected from the dangerous enemies of birth, death, and negative emotions. This then is the correct way to rely upon a spiritual master. Okay, next time we'll stop here. Next time we'll look at how we, on our part, now we've been pretty much focused on the teacher for all sorts of good reasons, but now we should also humbly sort of look into what qualifications do we need to have as students. That's also a very big question, really. So that's where we're gonna, it's about then taking responsibility then for our own engagement, our own practice. So any questions? Not? Okay, we'll conclude then. Question. Okay, there's a loud resounding no. Okay, that's clear enough. All right, well, we'll conclude, dedicate. Through all our births, where we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the Holy Gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others by this vast benefit of others without partiality or bias. May all attain Buddhahood together. Okay. Okay. See you next weekend. Next Saturday. Yeah. See you then.